Welcome back to another Tactical Fly Fisher video. I am your host and owner of Tactical Fly Fisher, Devin. Today we're going to start our first rod review in a series of videos that we're going to do over the coming months. We're not going to review all of the rods in the shop, but we are going to take some of our favorites and tell you why they're our favorites at certain price points. So today we're going to start right at the top. We're going to start with our favorite premium rod series, and that is the Thomas & Thomas Contact 2. I'll tell you a little bit about the rods, what they look like, and then how each model performs, and I'll take you through the whole series. So now the Contact 2 rod series, it's not brand new by any means. It's been around for a few years now. I think it debuted in 2019. I got to fish the first prototypes of it in December of 2018 into January of 2019, if I'm remembering correctly. Most of the rods in the series were designed by Joe Goodspeed back when he was at Thomas & Thomas. And I know Joe fairly well, and thankfully he was able to send me some prototypes. So I kind of got to see where this rod was coming from and how it differed from the Contact 1. Overall, the aesthetics are pretty similar to what the Contact 1 looked like. The rod still has an unsanded, unfinished blank, so it's just sort of the raw carbon wraps that are on it. Has a really nice classy look actually because of that. And the benefit to not having the finish on it or extra paint is that it really lightens up the blank. Maybe the drawback to having that unfinished blank is that it does catch sun and cause quite a bit of flash. So it's not the most matte colored rod when you're on the water. So if you have really spooky fish and you're over the top of them, who knows, that might be a drawback in that department. It does reduce swing weight and improves recovery speed by lightening up the blank. The rod also has mostly recoil single foot guides. The recoil, that's a nickel titanium alloy, a specific brand of guide that you can bend that guide and it springs back to its original shape. They also happen to be really light, and they can make them and you use them in pretty fine wire without them breaking. So recoil guides, they cost a lot. They're probably, if not the most expensive, one of the most expensive guides on the market. So it drives the price of any rods that they're on up, but they're durable and you can keep them in small sizes to lighten that rod up as well. In addition, it's got olive brown thread wraps on, or accents on all of the guides. It's a nice color scheme against that unfinished rod blank. It's got really nice wood inserts, top grade cork, all the things you would expect from a premium rod. And it is a premium rod. As of this video, it's $895. So it's going to set you back some dough, but if you want the best Euro nymphing rod, even at a premium price, it certainly would be one of the ones that I would consider the most. So let's go into the individual models now. Let's start at the bottom and we'll work our way up into the different models. So the 10-foot 2-weight, that's the shortest, or at least lightest weight 10-foot rod in the lineup. It's just an absolute sweetheart of a rod. I fished it last week again for the first time in a while, just to remind myself of it. It's not a rod I use a ton, simply because I'm often going back and forth between larger water with bigger fish, but it's also a rod I think I'm going to fish more again, because it is great at protecting fine tippet. So if you're really working down in that 7x or 8x territory, and you need shock absorption, the 10-foot 2-weight is probably the best rod that I've seen for still having good recovery speed, but also being soft. Many of the really soft rods that are out there, you'll flex that rod and it'll bend deep into the blank, but then it takes a long time for it to come back to that neutral position, and that makes the rod pretty inaccurate. And the 10-foot 2-weight in the Contact 2, it's still got pretty quick recovery speed for how soft that it is. It's still stiff in the lower part of the rod and in the butt section, but that inflection point, is somewhere around the center of the rod. So it bends a little bit deeper than like the 10-foot 3-weight, for instance. But that deeper bend, it does. It cushions your tippet, and it's a great rod for small water, smaller fish, and protecting light tippet, and also not bouncing smaller fish. And what do I mean by bouncing smaller fish? It's kind of a term that competitors use a lot. That's when you set the hook, you hook a fish, and you get a couple of head shakes, out of it, or you fight it for a while, but then the fish comes off during the fight. And in really stiff rods, because the tip doesn't flex and absorb shock in the head shakes of a fish, you can lose more fish than you would with a softer rod. So the 10-foot 2-weight is really good at avoiding bouncing fish. That tip flexes pretty well with the head shakes of smaller fish without them, bouncing and vibrating off. But it's a great all-around small stream, small water rod. I don't use it a lot for dry fly fishing myself, but my teammate Lance Egan, at least in the past, actually used this rod as his primary dry fly rod. So if you're wanting a really delicate rod, with a really light line presentation, you could also think about it as a dry fly or a crossover rod as well. Let's now look at the 10-foot 3-weight. The 10-foot 3-weight was actually the original rod that was the inspiration for the Contact 2. So Joe, back in his early TNT days, he was using some different materials for the Contact 1. He came across some different composites that he could use to make the rod a little bit more durable, and maybe a little stiffer as well. And so he thought first about making a 10-foot 3-weight. So this rod actually kind of debuted in the Contact 1 originally, and then he changed a few things on it, and it was the first one in the Contact 2 lineup. Now this rod, it's quite a bit stouter, quite a bit stiffer than the 10-foot 2-weight. It's got just a little bit more swing weight as a result. The 10-foot 2-weight probably has the lowest swing weight of almost any 10-foot Euro nymph rod that I've found. It's excellent in that. And the 10-foot 3-weight still has really low swing weight, but maybe just a little more than the 10-foot 2-weight. It's definitely quite a bit stiffer. It's a great rod if you want to have, there's a lot of folks that I'm always talking to out there that are looking for that one rod to do it all type situation. So a rod that could throw dry flies, maybe a short leader dry dropper rig with the standard floating line, Euro nymph with a dry dropper. So the 10-foot 3-weight is a good choice for that. It's stiff enough that for my casting style, I can still throw dry flies on it pretty well with the standard weight forward line. And but it still, it Euro nymphs really well, and throws. I actually think what I like this rod even the most for is fishing a dry dropper on a Euro nymph leader, because that extra stiffness means I can really punch casts, drive casts with that wind resistant dry fly, and still get the rod to turn over without it kind of folding and lagging behind my casting stroke. So the 10-foot 3-weight is a rod that I'll use if I especially want a dry dropper on a Euro nymph leader rod, and it's great for that. It still makes a great Euro nymph rod, just a pure nymph rod as well, but this is the rod, the 10-foot 3-weight that I would tell you to get if you want, a do-it-all rod. So if you want to throw dry flies, dry dropper, even a light indicator rig, and Euro nymph, that would be a good choice for you. The next rod in the lineup would be the 10-foot 9-inch 2-weight. So this is the newest rod in the Contact 2 lineup. I can't remember when it came out, but it hasn't been out nearly as long as some of the others. The 10-foot 9-inch 2-weight is a rod that some folks are going to really like. If you're wanting an all-around Euro nymphing rod, it's probably it's definitely not my favorite one in the lineup. Being that it's a 10-foot 9-inch rod, it gets you the extra reach that the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight would, but it's quite a bit softer than the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight. The inflection point on the rod, the flex point is still almost, at the middle ferrule, so it's near the center of the rod. The butt section is still pretty stout, but the curve, that taper of the rod, really quickly starts to bend and introduce a lot of flex around the center of the rod. When I do hard flex tests with this rod, the tip doesn't get quite vertical, but it really curves around, and it's a less progressive taper than the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight. So the good part about that is that you're going to get tippet protection, and you will be able to protect fine tippet, but still be able to fish larger rivers and have a lot of reach with this rod. The problem for me is that the tip, because it flexes so deeply compared to the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight, for example, the rod ends. I'll make a cast with this rod, and a quick, hard, punchy cast, and the butt section will come with me, but that tip lags behind a fair ways. The recovery speed isn't quite as good on this rod especially as the shorter rods or as the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight. So I'm just inaccurate with it, more so than I am some of the other models. So if you're, this is a rod that if you are fishing large rivers, wanting a rod to protect fine tippet, and you don't care as much about pinpoint accuracy, then it's a good choice for you. If you want a rod that is pinpoint accurate and you have a casting stroke that is somewhat aggressive and punchy, it's probably not the best choice for you unless you can learn to adjust the timing of your cast to the rod. For me, I'm pretty programmed to like slightly stiffer Euro nymph rods, at least for accuracy with my casting stroke, so it's not my favorite out of the bunch. And not one that I use a lot. But if you're a light tippet, big river guy, then the 10-foot 9-inch 2-weight might be for you. All right, let's move on to the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight. So this is the first rod I tested in the lineup. And what I did when I first got the prototype for this rod is I went out and grabbed the 10-foot 8-inch 3-weight, the Contact 1 version, and then grabbed this 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight prototype that Joe had sent me. And I went out and fished them side by side for a couple days straight just to see what the differences were. And the things I noticed about this rod is that the butt section was quite a bit stiffer all the way through the center of the rod than the original Contact 1 was. And that tip section, the oscillation on it, that recovery speed was noticeably quicker. So this rod's a little stouter and just has much quicker recovery speed than that original Contact 1 did. From what I've heard, it's also been quite a bit more durable as well, which is one of the benefits of the composite change that Joe was working with when he originally was designing these rods. So the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight is probably still my favorite all-around Euro nymph rod that's out there. It is great at so many things. It's got just enough reach that you can cover, it's almost an 11-foot rod, right? It's 3 inches short of an 11-foot rod. But the recovery speed and the performance, the accuracy, the swing weight, all those types of things, it feels closer to a 10.5-foot rod. So for me, in the past, I've fished a lot of 10.5-foot rods, mainly because that was sort of the break point where most companies could get up to that point in length without the recovery speed and the swing weight really suffering in the rod. And then, the accuracy and the fatigue suffering as an angler as a result. And so the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight is where I've settled as, a great all-around nymph rod where I've got a lot of reach. I can stay further away from the fish, especially in, spooky, clear water. But it recovers fast enough and has a taper that really suits my casting style, and so I'm accurate with the rod, and it still has pretty darn low swing weight for how long it is. So if you're looking for, that premium all-around, best all-around Euro nymph rod that you can get, the 1093, that 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight, that's the one that I always point people to, and I still love this rod. So it's a pretty hard one to beat, and one that I see myself fishing for a lot of years to come. The 10-foot 9-inch 4-weight is essentially designed as a trophy trout rod. So for those of you who might have followed Joe Goodspeed on Instagram, his Instagram handle is Teeth and Trout, I think. As that handle might suggest, he kind of chases a lot of predator type fish. So he chases false albacore and muskies. He ice fishes for lake trout and pike, and then he also fishes a lot for trophy trout. And as part of that, he does a lot of jigging large streamers, but still on Euro nymphing leaders. And so he's always designing a rod, made a lot for his purposes, and this rod was pretty much a Joe Goodspeed rod when he first designed it as a trophy trout rod. And it is that. So it's not a rod that's got, a lot of cushion all throughout the rod that you're going to be able to fish really fine tippet with. The butt section and the middle of the rod are really quite stiff, and even the tip is quite a bit stiffer than the 2 or 3 weight would be. But it still has just enough give in that tip that you can load this rod with sort of medium weight Euro nymphing rigs. It's not a rod I would want as an everyday, trout rod for, say, average rivers, average trout, because you're not going to get a lot of cushion for really fine tippet, and you are going to have a harder time casting really light rigs that you might find yourself fishing for shallow water. But if you're fishing big water, big rivers with big trout, heavier tippet on in general, jig streamers a lot, applications where you need more power for setting the hook, more power for casting heavier weight in your flies, this is that type of rod. It's built for those purposes, not for an all-around trout rod. If you want the all-around, one rod to do them all, the 10-foot 9-inch 3-weight is still a better pick. But if you want a rod specifically for those trophy trout tasks, then the 10-foot 9-inch 4-weight is a good rod for that. And I use a lot on bigger water, especially faster water rivers where I need that leverage and that hook setting ability. One of the last models in the lineup of Contact 2 rods is the 11-foot 2-inch 3-weight. At 11 feet 2 inches long, this is a long Euro nymphing rod. So, a lot of rods are going to cap out at that 11 feet in length. And this rod at 11 feet 2 inches long is probably the lightest rod that you're going to find at that length. The swing weight is still fishable. There are a lot of 11-foot rods out there that I'm not a big fan of, simply because I feel like the swing weight and the recovery speed the drawbacks of those two metrics outpace the reach that's added onto the rod. So for me, I tend to stop in that 10.5 to 10-foot 9-inch length for most of my rods. But if you're maybe shorter in stature and you have a hard time wading deeper, or you're always fishing larger rivers that you can put a drift boat on at least, then the 11-foot 2-inch 3-weight is probably a good choice for you, because I also find that pinpoint accuracy, under bushes and tight little spaces, things like that, it's not as important on those large rivers as it is on small water. So the 11-foot 2-inch 3-weight, it brings you that extra reach that you want for that type of water, but you will sacrifice things like a little bit of accuracy, more swing weight, and slower recovery speed for this rod due to that length. So you have to do a little bit of pro and con for the type of water that you're fishing most often, and see which benefits you want the most. And for me, I don't really fish the 11-foot 2-inch rod very often, even on bigger water, because I still am so tied to those slightly shorter, faster recovering rods. But it still could be a good choice for you if those are the waters that you frequent the most. The last rod in the Contact 2 lineup is the 10-foot 8-inch 6-weight. This rod was actually brought over from the Contact 1 lineup because it was one of the last rods designed in that lineup, and it was not redesigned for the 10-foot or for the Contact 2 range. Now, this rod is specifically a rod built for Euro nymphing for anadromous fish, so steelhead, smaller salmon, lake run brown trout, things like that. That's what this rod was designed for, and you can see that in its concept. The butt section and the middle of the rod are pretty darn stiff, although I have found that if you get steelhead that are, say, roughly 32 inches or larger, I wish that I actually had a little more power in the lower and the center of this rod. It's still it's very stout for smaller fish, and it's plenty big for everyday lake run fish. But if you're really breaking into those larger winter run coastal steelhead, or some of the largest Great Lakes steelhead that you'll find, you'll still have enough rod in this, but you may find that you wish you just had a little bit more if they go on a hard screaming run and you got to stop them before they get into a tree or something like that, for instance. But this rod has a lot of hook setting power for deep, heavy water. It's not going to load easily with light rigs, but you're typically not fishing really light rigs for steelhead, at least in my experience. But don't be trying to fish, 5X on this rod. It's at least a 4X and heavier type rod because you just don't have cushion for a lighter tip than that. But there is more cushion than a lot of, let's say you were going to take a 10'7" or a 10'8" weight rod out there, the typical single-hander. There is more cushion than a lot of those rods, so you tend not to break off some fish that you might if you just had a standard single-hander. So it's kind of a little bit of the best of both worlds, which is what you're trying to find in a Euro rod. One thing that I would say that I really wish could be addressed or updated on this rod is the placement of the first stripping guide. It's on that second section, right at the bottom of the second section, but it's quite a long ways away from your hand in the handle. If Thompson Thomas chooses to do an update on the Contact 2 series down the road and they want to have that same sort of rod, I would definitely bring that first stripping guide a little bit closer to your hand to minimize the amount of sag that is in between those fingers and the first stripping guide. That's about it for this Contact 2 review. Let me just summarize with some basic pros and cons from what I've talked about. Let's start with the pros. So the Contact 2 lineup, it's a premium rod at a premium price, but it is a premium rod. Everything is top quality on this rod. All the components, the guides they chose, the composite of the rod itself, that unsanded blank that makes the rod really light. All these rods have low swing weight at their respective length and weight of rod, and they recover quickly. And those are two of the biggest metrics of performance that I'm looking for when it comes to Euro nymph rods. So across the board, these are all very good rods, and there's a model in the lineup, for just about any type of Euro nymphing you want to focus on. So lots of pros. The cons, it is a premium price rod, so it's going to cost you some money. Part of that is that it's made in America, and then the other part is that they're all, like I said, top quality components, but it is going to cost you quite a bit more than a lot of rods will. But I don't feel like the cost is outweighing the actual value of this rod. It's a really nice rod. Also, across the board, most of the rod models in the Contact 2, especially some of the longer ones, I wish that first stripping guide was just a little bit closer to the handle to help minimize that sag between your fingers and that first stripping guide. That placement did get lowered from the Contact 1, so it's better across the board from the Contact 1, but they could go still even closer with that first stripping guide to the hand to minimize that sag. It's something that has been done on quite a few other Euro rods to focus on that metric. Lastly, that unsanded rod blink, it's really pretty. Aesthetically, it has a nice sort of traditional old-fashioned look to it, especially when combined with the color of the thread wraps and all the other hardware. But that unsanded blank does cause quite a bit of rod flash. So if you take this outside, look at it in the sun, you're going to see a lot. It's going to look like a mirror coming off the side of the rod. So there are benefits to that unsanded blank in that it makes the rod lighter, has lower swing weight, and it is aesthetically quite nice to look at. But if you're really worried about spooking fish, especially at short range, which is typically where we're Euro nymphing, then that rod flash from that unsanded blank could be a problem. I haven't found a good way to test this yet, but it's something I'm always looking at if I'm sight fishing to fish to see if I happen to be spooking them with my rod movements. Okay, thanks for watching this Contact 2 review. I hope that it answered some of your questions. If you do have further questions, you can always email us at info@tacticalflyfisher.com or drop a comment below, although you can typically reach us more quickly through the email. If you liked it, please give us that thumbs up and subscribe to the Tactical Fly Fisher YouTube channel, and then come on over to tacticalflyfisher.com where you can buy a Contact 2 or any of the other rods that we have in stock, and any of the other fly tying and fly fishing goodies that you might need for your next adventure. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay fishy. Have fun.